My name is Celeste Harrington, 32 years old. The crystal chandeliers above the Grand View Manor glittered like frozen stars, their light scattering across the marble floor in dazzling fragments. 300 guests had been laughing, drinking, and dancing, but now the entire ballroom was plunged into a strange silence. My cheek stung, burning from the sudden, sharp crack of Rebecca's palm, and a ribbon of red wine ran down the front of my cream-colored dress, dripping steadily onto the floor like blood. The echo of the slap was louder in my ears than the orchestra that faltered and stopped mid-song. Gasps rippled through the crowd like the sound of a wave crashing on the shore. I stood frozen, one hand instinctively rising to my face, my body locked in disbelief. "How dare you ruin my perfect day?" Rebecca's voice sliced through the hush. Her designer gown shimmered under the lights, her bouquet trembling slightly in her clenched fist. A manicured hand still clutched the empty wineglass she had just emptied over me. Her eyes, usually sharp with mischief, now burned with a venomous fury. I had only wanted to hug her. That was all. A simple, human gesture. But my heel had caught on the edge of her gown's extravagant train, tugging a few beads loose. A minor accident, barely noticeable to anyone but her. Yet in that instant, Rebecca turned it into a catastrophe. Her shriek came again, high-pitched, theatrical. "Clumsy fool! Can't you even walk properly? This is my wedding, Celeste." Before I could form words, another voice cut through the air, colder than ice. "Rebecca's right." I turned. My husband, Fernando, had stepped forward, his gaze fixed on me with a mixture of disdain and disappointment. His arm slid protectively around his sister's shoulders. "You should have been more careful. This is her special day, and you nearly destroyed it." The words hit harder than the slap. In that moment, 300 pairs of eyes fell on me. Some filled with pity, others with judgment, many with uncomfortable silence. My cheeks burned hotter than the wine-soaked fabric clinging to my skin. I wanted to protest, to explain that it was an accident, that I only wanted to embrace her. But the weight of Fernando's betrayal, of him siding so swiftly with Rebecca, crushed the words in my throat. I thought I knew humiliation. I thought I had learned long ago how to endure the sharp edge of criticism, to keep my dignity intact when people underestimated me. But this was different. This was public. This was cruel. Rebecca leaned into Fernando's chest, her expression softening into a mask of victimhood. "I only wanted to thank her," she said, her voice trembling in feigned sorrow. "And she tripped on my dress. She nearly ruined everything." I saw the way she looked at me through her lashes, triumphant, almost smug. This wasn't just rage, it was calculated. The guests whispered. Some muttered about the dress, others about Rebecca's temper. A few glanced at me with hesitant sympathy, but most stayed silent, unwilling to intervene. In the world of lavish weddings and fragile reputations, silence was safer than truth. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as desert stone. My instinct screamed at me to shrink, to disappear into the marble, to let the storm pass. For years, I had trained myself to play small in moments like this, to keep the peace for the sake of love and family. But even as I fought the rising tide of humiliation, a strange calm pressed against the edges of my panic, like the air before a thunderstorm. Then came the sound that shifted everything, the deliberate, measured click of polished shoes against marble. Travis. The groom, Rebecca's new husband, walked toward the microphone at the edge of the ballroom. His jaw was set tight, his dark eyes blazing with an anger I hadn't seen in him before. Each step echoed, slow and heavy, commanding silence. Guests leaned forward, sensing something monumental was about to happen. He reached the microphone, gripped it with both hands, and spoke with a voice that rumbled like thunder across the room. "Rebecca," he said, enunciating each syllable with deliberate calm, "did you just slap—" His gaze swept over the audience, then landed squarely on me. "The CEO of Caden Marketing?" The room froze. It was as if time itself had stopped. The clinking of glasses, the rustle of gowns, the whispers, all evaporated. The silence was suffocating. I saw recognition dawning on faces across the crowd. Whispers began as a faint breeze, but quickly swelled into a storm of murmurs. "Caden Marketing?" someone whispered. "Isn't that—" Another voice gasped. "That's Celeste Harrington?" Eyes that once looked at me with disdain now widened with curiosity, awe, even fear. The waiters, who had stood idle like invisible servants, suddenly straightened. One nearly dropped his tray, then rushed forward with trembling hands, bowing slightly. "Ma'am, please, please let us help," he stammered, offering napkins to blot the wine from my dress. I barely moved. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. Fernando's expression faltered. His smug mask cracked into something else, confusion, then dawning horror. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words emerged. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, but he had no idea what to do with what he saw. Rebecca's bouquet slipped from her hand, crashing softly to the floor. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath the harsh ballroom lights. Her lips parted in shock, but she could only manage a strangled, whispered protest. What? But Travis wasn't finished. He tightened his grip on the microphone, his knuckles whitening, his voice growing stronger, sharper. "The woman you just humiliated," he declared, sweeping his gaze across the silent room, "is not just any guest. She is the woman who saved my career 5 years ago when no one else would take a chance on me. She is the woman who built a billion-dollar empire from nothing, and she chose to live quietly, humbly, without flaunting her success." The ballroom erupted into hushed shock. Guests turned to one another in disbelief. I felt every gaze shift, their perception of me altering in real time. Just moments ago, I had been the invisible wife, the clumsy sister-in-law. Now they looked at me as though I were royalty, someone powerful they had underestimated. Rebecca swayed slightly, as if the words themselves were physical blows. Her perfect wedding day was unraveling stitch by stitch, thread by thread. And yet, standing there with my face still burning, my dress still soaked, I realized something chilling. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. The microphone's feedback hummed for a moment, sharp and piercing, as if the ballroom itself held its breath. Travis's voice steadied, gaining force with every syllable. "Do you understand what you've done, Rebecca? You just slapped the CEO of Caden Marketing, one of the most powerful women in the industry." The guests gasped again, a ripple of realization running through them like electricity. Whispers swelled until they became a low storm of voices. "Caden Marketing? The Celeste Harrington? She's been on Forbes, hasn't she? I thought she was just Fernando's wife." The tide had turned. I stood frozen in place, my breath shallow, my heart thundering. For years, I had chosen silence, anonymity, letting Fernando believe I was just another quiet wife with a modest career. And now, in one sweeping revelation, that facade shattered. Rebecca's hand trembled as it clutched at Fernando's sleeve. Her perfect poise slipped away, leaving behind a pale, wide-eyed woman staring at the wreckage of her own choices. "Travis?" she whispered, voice thin, desperate. "I didn't know." Travis didn't even look at her. His jaw clenched, his eyes locked onto the crowd. "This woman," he said, pointing at me with a steady hand, "took a risk on me when no one else would. My first project, every firm in the city turned me down. They said it was impossible, too risky, too ambitious. But Celeste saw what I was trying to build. She saw the vision. And she didn't just take a chance, she fought for me." The ballroom stilled again, caught in his words. I could feel 300 eyes tracing me from head to toe, trying to reconcile the quiet woman they thought they knew with the empire builder they had just discovered. My stomach twisted. This was the moment I had dreaded for years, the collision of my two lives. Travis continued, his voice stronger now, resonant with conviction. "Without her, Thompson Architecture would never have existed. Without her, none of my developments would stand today. She believed when no one else would." His hand tightened around the microphone until his knuckles blanched. "And you, Rebecca, you humiliated her in front of everyone." Rebecca flinched. Her body shook as if his words carried physical weight. "Travis, please, it was an accident." "Accident?" His laugh was sharp, bitter. "You slapped her. You poured wine on her. That's not an accident. That's cruelty." Her face crumpled. Tears welled at the edges of her perfectly lined eyes, threatening to spill. The confident bride who had glowed in front of cameras and guests minutes ago now looked like a cornered child. Fernando's expression shifted from smugness to dawning horror. He stared at me, lips parted, his face drained of color. I saw the exact second he realized the truth. The modest car, the quiet lifestyle, the ease with which I paid bills and family emergencies. He was piecing it together, and the puzzle terrified him. "Celeste," he whispered, his voice trembling, "why didn't you ever—" But Travis's voice cut him off, sharp as a blade. Next week, I was supposed to announce the biggest partnership of my career, Thompson Architecture and Caden Marketing, together. A $200 million merger that was meant to change everything. But after tonight, after what I just witnessed, I'm not sure it can go forward. The silence was thunderous. You could almost hear the sound of reputations breaking, gasps, a stifled scream from one of Rebecca's bridesmaids, the frantic tapping of guests pulling out their phones under the tables, texting, tweeting, recording. The story was already bleeding into the outside world. Rebecca swayed, her knees buckling slightly. Travis, no. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks. She clutched his arm desperately, but he shook her off with a flick of his wrist, his eyes full of disappointment. You've embarrassed yourself, but worse, you've embarrassed me, and you've risked everything we've built. Her sobs came, small and broken, the sound of someone watching her castle of illusions crumble. She reached toward Fernando, like a drowning woman reaching for a rope. He caught her instinctively, holding her up, though his eyes never left me. He looked terrified, not for Rebecca, not even for himself, but for the life he thought he knew, the life built on the lie that I was ordinary, dependent on him. Inside, my emotions tangled into a knot of humiliation, sorrow, and something else, something sharper. Not triumph, not yet, but a flicker of power, a memory of who I really was beneath the quiet mask. The waiters hovered near me, bowing, dabbing at my dress with napkins, murmuring apologies, as if they had been the ones who wronged me. Their trembling hands and reverent tones made the transformation surreal. Just minutes ago, I was invisible. Now they treated me like royalty. I wanted to scream. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Instead, I stood in silence, letting it all unravel, knowing the storm had only begun. The whispers in the ballroom faded into the distance, but inside my mind, they roared. CEO, Empire, Forbes. Words that once defined me in the business world now hung over me like a thundercloud in my personal life. I should have expected this day to come, the collision of my two lives. For years, I'd carefully built walls between them, telling myself I could sustain both, that I could be both women at once. In the boardroom, I was Celeste Harrington, iron-willed, decisive, a strategist who had clawed her way from nothing into building Caden Marketing, an empire that shaped brands across 6 continents, a name whispered with reverence in business circles, both feared and admired. I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But at home, I was just Celeste Matthews, Fernando's wife, quiet, ordinary, someone with a little marketing job. It sounds absurd now, but in the beginning, it made sense. I had seen what power did to people, how success could isolate. I'd watch colleagues become shells of themselves, surrounded not by friends, but opportunists who clung to them for favors, money, prestige. I swore I wouldn't become one of them. And so I created 2 lives. In one, I wore power like armor, commanding respect with every decision. In the other, I stripped it away, choosing simplicity. I drove a modest Honda, shopped at Target, lived in a suburban home that never hinted at penthouse views I also owned. I cooked, cleaned, laughed at sitcoms with Fernando on our worn-out couch. He liked it that way. In his mind, he was the breadwinner, the head of our household. He worked as a regional sales manager for a mid-sized company. His paycheck was respectable, but unremarkable. He loved telling people about it, puffing out his chest when he talked numbers. I never contradicted him. I let him believe it. Because I loved him. Or at least I loved who I thought he was. I told myself love was enough, that it didn't matter if he never asked about my work or why I never spoke about a boss or coworkers. That it didn't matter if he brushed off my suggestions during arguments, dismissing them with, "You wouldn't understand, Celeste. Marketing is different from the real business world." I would smile, swallow the sting, and tell myself it was okay, because love meant compromise. Love meant humility. Love meant letting him lead, even if I could see the cliff edge long before he did. But the cracks had always been there. I remember one night, early in our marriage, we were at dinner with friends. The conversation turned to finances. Someone asked how we managed vacations so easily when Fernando's salary didn't seem to stretch that far. Fernando laughed, casually throwing an arm around me. "Oh, Celeste is good at stretching a budget. She knows how to save every penny." They chuckled, and I smiled. biting back the truth, that it was my quiet money, my empire, funding those vacations, that my signature alone had paid for the down payment on our home, that I had silently erased Rebecca's mounting debts from their joint account just to keep peace. But I stayed silent. And that silence cost me more than I realized, because over time, Fernando began to believe his own version of reality, that he was the provider, that I was lucky to have him, that my small life revolved around his shadow. He never saw the nights I stayed awake in my penthouse office, glass walls reflecting the city lights, orchestrating campaigns worth millions. He never asked why I disappeared for business trips, content to believe I was a low-level consultant tagging along to someone else's meeting. He never wondered how I could pay off his sister's endless debts without blinking. And maybe I let him believe it because I was afraid. Afraid that if he knew the truth, he'd see me differently. Not as his wife, but as competition. Not as someone to love, but someone to resent. The irony was cruel. I thought I was protecting our love by hiding my power, but in reality, I was slowly dismantling the very foundation of our marriage. Because love built on lies, no matter how well-intentioned, is still fragile. I thought I could keep balancing both lives forever. I thought I could keep my dignity in the shadows and still find happiness in the light of his approval. But tonight proved me wrong. As I stood there, cheeks burning from his sister's slap and his betrayal, I realized something chilling. Fernando had always loved the illusion. He loved the quiet Celeste, who never outshone him, who played small so he could play big. He never loved me, the real me. Rebecca Harrington Thompson, my sister-in-law, the princess of the Harrington family. She had always been the kind of woman who believed the universe existed to orbit her. Every conversation had to end with her name. Every problem was someone else's responsibility, and every triumph, no matter how small, deserved applause. To outsiders, she sparkled. She was charming when she wanted to be, photogenic in every Instagram post, the kind of woman who seemed born to stand in the spotlight. But behind closed doors, behind the filters and the curated smiles, she was chaos. A chaos Fernando defended relentlessly. Family comes first, he would tell me, whenever I dared, to suggest that Rebecca learn a shred of responsibility. She's my little sister. I have to take care of her. At first, I admired it, his loyalty, his devotion to family, but over time, admiration curdled into exhaustion, because Rebecca's emergencies never ended. One week it was overdue rent, the next, maxed out credit cards. Then it was money for new equipment for her influencer career. A camera, a ring light, a trip to Bali she insisted was an investment in her brand. And every time Fernando pulled money from our joint account without a second thought. Our money, though really mine. I still remember the night she invited herself over for dinner. I had prepared roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and asparagus. Simple, comforting food. She wrinkled her nose the moment she sat at the table. "Is this it?" she asked, poking at the plate with her fork. "It's home-cooked," I replied evenly. I thought something hearty would be nice. She gave a little laugh, tossing her long hair over her shoulder. "Well, I guess not everyone can eat 5-star meals every night. Don't worry, Celeste. Practice makes perfect." Fernando chuckled beside her. He didn't defend me. He never did. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. Later that night, I overheard her whispering to him in the kitchen while I washed the dishes. "Honestly, I don't know how you live with her," Rebecca said. "She's so boring. And that dress she wore at dinner last week? Yikes! You should really encourage her to make more of an effort." Fernando's low murmur reached me, muffled but clear enough. "She's just simple. She doesn't need much. That's why I love her." Simple. The word lodged itself deep in my chest like a shard of glass. But Rebecca's disdain wasn't limited to words. She knew how to twist the knife, and she did it with precision. One afternoon, she barged into our house without warning, tossing her designer bag onto the couch. "I need a loan," she announced. "Travis's firm is hosting a gala, and I can't be seen wearing last season's gown." Before I could respond, Fernando was already reaching for the checkbook. "Of course, Beck. How much?" "Just a few thousand," she said breezily. I stood frozen, soap still dripping from my hands as I stared at them, my husband handing over our money, my money, like it was nothing. Rebecca smirked at me, catching my eye as she accepted the check. "Thanks, Celeste. I know you don't understand how important appearances are, but luckily, Fernando does." The arrogance in her smile made my blood boil, but I said nothing. I swallowed it down, like I always did. And then came Travis. The whirlwind engagement after only 8 months. The glittering ring she flaunted in every photo. Fernando beaming with pride, as if Rebecca had just won a Nobel Prize instead of a husband. She paraded Travis in front of us constantly, her arm looped through his as if he were her most precious accessory. And though she played the role of doting fiancé, I caught glimpses of her true nature slipping through the cracks. One evening during dinner, Rebecca snapped at him over the wine list. "You always choose the cheap bottles. God, Travis, try to act like we belong here." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He looked at me across the table, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Because Travis knew who I was. He had recognized me the moment Fernando introduced us. His eyes widened with surprise, then softened with gratitude. He remembered. Years earlier, when his architectural dreams were fragile sketches and rejected proposals, I had believed in him. I had staked my reputation on his vision, fought my board when they called him a gamble, and turned his career into a success story. And now he was engaged to Rebecca, the same Rebecca who treated me like dirt under her heels. The irony was bitter. At family gatherings, I saw the confusion flicker across Travis's face as Rebecca criticized me, as Fernando laughed along, as I sat silently, pretending it didn't hurt. Once, after a particularly cruel comment about my little job, Travis lingered as Rebecca left the room. He leaned close, his voice low. "Why do you let them speak to you like that?" I forced a smile. It's easier this way. But inside I was crumbling. Rebecca's disdain, Fernando's blind loyalty, Travis's silent judgment. It was a triangle tightening around me. And deep down I sensed it couldn't last forever. Because secrets have a way of surfacing. Lies eventually unravel. And people like Rebecca, who lived for the spotlight, who fed on others' silence, always sow the seeds of their own destruction. I just didn't realize that destruction would explode on her wedding day. The morning of Rebecca's wedding should have been filled with joy, with laughter echoing through the halls of Grandview Manor. Instead, it felt like stepping into a play where every smile was rehearsed and every gesture sharpened like a blade. Rebecca, usually sharp-tongued and dismissive, was suddenly sweet, too sweet. "Celeste," she cooed when I arrived early to help, gliding toward me in a silk robe embroidered with her initials. "I'm so glad you're here. I couldn't have done this without you." The words dripped like honey, but the glance she gave me was calculating, assessing. I forced a smile, unsure how to respond. For years, Rebecca had found fault in everything I did, every choice I made, and now she was thanking me? My instincts screamed that it was a performance. She pressed a flute of champagne into my hand, her manicured fingers brushing mine. "You look lovely, by the way. That dress. So professional." The way she lingered on the word professional made it sound like an insult wrapped in silk. I smoothed the cream-colored fabric of my dress self-consciously. It wasn't extravagant, but it was elegant, chosen deliberately to be appropriate without drawing attention. At least that was my intention. Rebecca's eyes gleamed, though her smile remained fixed. "It suits you. Very understated." I felt my stomach twist. Understated, simple, always the same refrain. Still, I busied myself with last-minute tasks, arranging the guest book, adjusting flower vases, helping direct the caterers. Anything to ignore the prickle of unease crawling down my spine. The Grandview Manor itself was breathtaking, almost oppressive in its grandeur. Soaring ceilings, marble columns veined like frozen rivers, and crystal chandeliers that caught every flicker of light, the kind of place designed to make people feel small. Rebecca had spared no expense. From the imported orchids lining the aisle to the string quartet rehearsing softly in the corner, it was all immaculate, a fantasy carved from money, most of which I suspected had come from our joint account. As I stepped into the ballroom to inspect the seating arrangements, I caught sight of Travis standing by the windows, speaking with the photographer. The morning sun streamed behind him, outlining his figure in gold. When he saw me, his expression softened. "Celeste," he said warmly, crossing the room, "you look perfect. That color suits you." The compliment was simple, genuine, but I saw the flicker of Rebecca's smile falter when she noticed. Her eyes narrowed before she quickly masked it with another sugary grin. "Oh yes," she chimed in, slipping her arm possessively through his. "Celeste always dresses so sensibly, never a risk-taker." Her tone was light, but her grip on Travis's arm was tight, her nails pressing into his sleeve. I nodded, forcing a polite smile, though my insides churned. The ceremony itself unfolded like a dream. painted in soft pastels. Rebecca glided down the aisle in her designer gown, her veil cascading like mist. Guests sniffled, cameras clicked, and for a fleeting moment, even I felt touched. Travis's face when he saw her was genuine, raw. His eyes shone with emotion as he whispered vows that trembled with love. For that instant, I almost believed there was hope, that maybe, despite everything, this day could mend old wounds. But shadows lurked even in beauty. As I stood among the bridesmaids during photographs, I overheard Rebecca whisper sharply to her maid of honor, "Make sure Celeste doesn't stand too close. I don't want her ruining the pictures with that dress." The words sliced, even though she smiled sweetly when she turned back toward me. I laughed softly under my breath, masking the sting. Years of practice had taught me to smile while bleeding inside. Still, something about her sudden generosity, the forced compliments, the exaggerated affection, it all felt like a performance designed for an audience, like bait. During the reception preparations, a waiter carrying a tray of wine glasses stumbled, sending one crashing to the floor. The sharp shatter echoed through the ballroom. Guests startled, some laughing nervously. I flinched. The sound felt like an omen, jagged and foreboding. Rebecca laughed lightly, brushing it off. "Careful, we wouldn't want any more accidents today." Her eyes lingered on me as she said it. The unease in my stomach deepened. Something about the way she said accidents made my skin crawl. As the day drifted into evening, the music swelled, the champagne flowed, and laughter filled the air. Everyone around me basked in the illusion of celebration. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking across a stage set for tragedy. And I was the chosen target. The ballroom shimmered in golden light as dinner plates were cleared, champagne flutes refilled, and guests settled back into their seats for the speeches. Laughter rippled through the room, the air thick with the scent of roasted lamb and roses. I sat quietly at the edge of the head table, my smile practiced, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Then Fernando rose, glass in hand. "My sister Rebecca," he began, his voice booming with the confidence of someone who loved a microphone, "has always been special, beautiful, ambitious, full of life. She's everything a man could want in a wife. Travis, you're a lucky man." Applause fluttered through the room. Rebecca glowed, her smile stretching wider, basking in the praise. Fernando paused, his eyes drifting across the tables until they landed on me. His lips curved into the faintest of smirks. "Rebecca has never been content to just blend into the background," he continued. "She's always pushed herself, always reached for more. That's something I've always admired about her." A ripple of unease prickled across my skin. The implication landed like a knife, unlike some people who are content being invisible. The audience chuckled politely, but I felt their glances, the quick, awkward looks in my direction, some sympathetic, some uncomfortable, some amused. Heat rushed to my face. I forced a smile, though my nails dug into my palm under the table. It wasn't the first time Fernando had used humor to chip away at me, but this time it was sharper, louder, delivered with 300 witnesses nodding along. Rebecca laughed, tilting her head back, her eyes flicking toward me with satisfaction. She thrived on moments like this, me shrinking, her shining. I stared down at my folded hands, willing myself not to cry, not to break, not to let them see how deep the blade had cut. When the applause faded, Fernando lifted his glass higher. "To my sister, an inspiration to us all. May she and Travis have a lifetime of happiness together." The toast ended, glasses clinked. The band struck up a soft melody. But my world felt smaller, tighter, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I slipped away from the table, weaving through clusters of laughing guests until I found myself near the gift table, standing alone. My reflection stared back at me in the polished silver card box, wine-dark eyes, a fixed smile, a woman playing the role of invisible wife. "Quiet tonight," a voice said softly. I turned. Travis stood beside me, his tux jacket unbuttoned, his tie slightly loosened. His expression was warm but searching, his gaze lingering as if he saw straight through the facade I wore like armor. "It's Rebecca's day," I replied automatically, my tone light, practiced. "I'm happy to stay in the background." He studied me for a long moment. Then, in a voice so low I barely heard it, he asked, "Are you happy?" The question lodged in my chest. When was the last time someone had asked me that? When was the last time I had asked myself? "Of course," I said, my lips curving into a smile that felt brittle. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they rang hollow. Travis's dark eyes softened, with something that looked like regret, as if he wished he could say more, as if he wanted to peel back the silence between us. But before he could speak again, Rebecca's voice pierced the air. "There you are, darling." She swept up in a flurry of silk and perfume, linking her arm through his with proprietary ease. Her eyes flicked toward me, gleaming with triumph. "Celeste, could you make sure the cake cutting is set up? The photographer's waiting." I nodded quickly, already moving toward the cake table. As I walked away, I heard her voice, pitched just loud enough to carry. "I don't know why Celeste always looks so serious. She should try to have fun for once." Travis's reply was too quiet to catch, but I caught the disapproving edge in his tone. I didn't linger to listen. I couldn't. My throat ached, my chest heavy. The cake table gleamed under the chandeliers, a towering confection of sugar and fondant roses. I adjusted the silver knives, straightened the napkins, busied my hands. Anything to avoid thinking about Fernando's words, about Travis's question, about the truth I couldn't admit even to myself. Because the truth was dangerous. The truth was cracks spreading across the glass walls of my carefully built life. And sooner or later, the glass would shatter. The band was in full swing, couples twirling across the marble floor, laughter spilling through the golden-lit ballroom. I stood by the cake table, smiling politely at strangers who mistook me for just another guest, silently longing for the night to end. Then I heard my name. "Celeste, sister-in-law!" Rebecca's voice rang like a bell across the crowd. Heads turned as she waved to me from the center of the room, her cheeks flushed from champagne, her eyes glittering with something sharp. "Come here," she called sweetly. "Come give me a proper hug." For a moment, warmth bloomed in my chest. Maybe this was peace. Maybe she'd finally decided to set aside the barbs, to treat me like family. I stepped forward, weaving through clusters of guests. Rebecca's smile widened, dazzling and bright, her arms outstretched. "I want to thank you for all your help today," she said loudly enough for the tables around us to hear. "I couldn't have done it without you." My throat tightened with relief. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe this day could still end with healing. I lifted my arms, leaning into her embrace. And then it happened. My heel caught on the delicate beadwork of her train. There was the faintest tug, a soft sound of beads snapping. Barely audible, barely visible. But Rebecca gasped as if I'd ripped the gown in half. "My dress!" Her shriek split the air. Before I could step back, before I could stammer out an apology, her hand struck my cheek with brutal precision. The sound cracked through the ballroom like thunder. Conversations halted mid-sentence, music died mid-note, glasses froze halfway to lips. 300 guests turned to watch me, standing motionless, my cheek burning, my breath stolen. Rebecca's face twisted with rage. "You ruined my wedding dress!" she screamed, her voice trembling with manufactured devastation. I held up my hands, my voice breaking. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to?" Her words cut like glass. "You stepped on my train, on my wedding day. Do you know what this cost?" The truth was, the damage was minimal. A few beads, a loose thread, nothing that couldn't be fixed in seconds. But to Rebecca, it was enough. Enough to unleash the cruelty she'd been hiding behind champagne smiles all day. "Please," I whispered, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. "Let me fix it." But her eyes gleamed with triumph. Before I could retreat, she snatched a glass of red wine from a passing tray. With one swift motion, she hurled it down the front of my cream-colored dress. The cold liquid soaked instantly, bleeding crimson across the fabric, dripping onto the pristine marble. "There," she spat, her chest heaving with anger. "Now we both have ruined dresses." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Some horrified, some entertained, most too stunned to react. I stood trembling, the stain spreading across my body like a wound, my heart hammering in my chest. My humiliation was complete, delivered not by strangers, but by family. Then came the betrayal that broke me. Fernando. Instead of rushing to my defense, instead of scolding his sister for her cruelty, he stepped closer to Rebecca, his hand on her shoulder. "Celeste, what is wrong with you?" His voice was sharp, loud, carrying across the silent ballroom. "This is Rebecca's wedding day. The least you could do is be careful." My stomach dropped. He wrapped his arm around her protectively, stroking her back as if she were the victim. "You know how important this is to her," he continued, his voice cold, rehearsed. "How could you be so careless?" The words pierced me like daggers. In front of 300 witnesses, my husband had chosen his sister. My dignity, my feelings, my truth. Dismissed, discarded, humiliated. Rebecca leaned into his embrace, her face transformed into that of the wronged bride. "I never expected her to be so clumsy," she said, her voice soft with false innocence. "I just wanted to thank her." "Don't worry about it," Fernando murmured, his eyes flicking toward me with disdain. Celeste should have known better. A strangled laugh escaped my throat, half disbelief, half despair. My own husband, the man I had loved, the man I had sacrificed for, was siding with the woman who had just slapped me, soaked me in wine, and stripped me of my dignity. My hands shook as I brushed at the red spreading across my dress, but it was useless. The stain was indelible, seared into the fabric like a brand. The ballroom was deathly silent, save for the rapid clicking of cameras and the hushed murmurs spreading like wildfire. Every guest could feel it. This wasn't just an accident. This was a reckoning. My chest constricted, my vision blurred. I wanted to run, to disappear, to wake up from this nightmare. But the sound that followed froze me in place. A deliberate, steady rhythm of polished shoes against marble. Click, click, click. Travis. He was walking toward the microphone, his face a mask of controlled fury. And in that moment I realized the night was only just beginning. The ballroom air was thick, heavy, suffocating. I could feel 300 stares pressing into my back as the sound of Travis's shoes echoed across the marble. Click, click, click. He reached the microphone, towering with a controlled fury that silenced even the whispering guests. His hands gripped the stand so tightly his knuckles turned white. For a long, tense moment, he said nothing. Just let the weight of the silence build. Let the audience lean forward in breathless anticipation. Then his voice cut through the stillness. Low, steady, dangerous. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his eyes scanning the crowd before locking onto Rebecca, "I need to address what just happened here." Rebecca's face lit with relief, clearly expecting him to smooth things over, to spin the story into a harmless accident. She straightened her shoulders, wiping the wet streaks of wine from her hands, already preparing to bask in his defense. But Travis's jaw tightened. "Rebecca," his words were sharp, deliberate. "Did you just slap?" He turned, gesturing toward me. "The CEO of Caden Marketing?" The effect was immediate. Gasps tore through the ballroom. A ripple of recognition swept across the guests. Murmurs erupted like a storm breaking. "Caden Marketing? That's, oh my God. Her? No, it can't be. She's been on Forbes 3 times. I thought she was just Fernando's wife." Phones lit up under tables, fingers typing furiously as the revelation spread beyond the walls of Grandview Manor. I stood frozen, my cheeks burning, my dress dripping crimson. For years, I had hidden in plain sight, shrinking my empire into silence for the sake of family. Now, in an instant, the secret I had guarded with my very heart was laid bare. The waitstaff reacted first. Men and women who had been standing like invisible shadows suddenly rushed forward, their heads bowed, napkins trembling in their hands. "Ma'am, please, allow us," one stammered, dabbing clumsily at my ruined dress. Another bowed so low his forehead nearly brushed the marble. "We're so sorry, Ms. Harrington." Their voices quivered with deference, their fear of offending me now palpable. Rebecca staggered backward, her bouquet slipping from her hands. The once radiant bride looked ghostly, her skin pale under the chandeliers. Her lips moved, forming words that never came. "No," she whispered finally, her voice trembling. "No, she's lying. She can't be." But Travis's voice thundered over hers. "She is. This woman," he pointed directly at me, "built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. She's the reason I'm standing here today. When every firm in the city rejected me, when every investor laughed me out of the room, Celeste Harrington believed, she took a risk no one else would. She saved my career." Gasps again. Heads turned. Guests whispered frantically, their eyes darting between me and Rebecca, between me and Fernando. "Fernando." My husband looked as if the ground had opened beneath his feet. His mouth worked soundlessly, his eyes wide with dawning horror. I watched realization crash over him, the vacations, the house, the ease with which bills were paid. All the things he thought were his victories. They had been mine. "Celeste," he croaked, his voice weak. Why didn't you ever tell me?" But Travis wasn't finished. He tightened his grip on the microphone, his voice rising with righteous fury. Next week, he declared, I was supposed to announce the largest partnership in my company's history. Thompson Architecture and Caden Marketing united in a $200 million merger. But after what I witnessed tonight, after watching my wife slap and humiliate the very woman who made all of this possible, I don't know if that merger can go forward. The words hit like a bomb. You could feel the air shift, the collective gasp, the invisible weight of millions slipping through Rebecca's manicured fingers. Guests leaned into one another, whispering urgently, 200 million? She's ruined him, ruined herself. What a disaster. Rebecca swayed, her knees buckling. Travis, no, please, you can't. Her voice cracked, breaking into sobs. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know who she was. Travis's eyes blazed. That's the problem. You didn't need to know who she was to treat her with respect, but you didn't care. You showed your true character. Rebecca's tears streaked black trails down her flawless makeup, her sobs turning into desperate hiccups. She looked around the room wildly, seeking sympathy, but found only judgment, disgust, and pity. And Fernando, my husband, my supposed partner, looked at me as though he had never truly seen me before. His face was ashen, his voice a whisper of regret. Celeste, my God. But it was too late. Because the truth was out, the mask was gone, and the life we had all pretended to live, the lies, the humiliations, the silence, was unraveling thread by thread before 300 witnesses. And for the first time in years, I felt the smallest flicker of freedom. The ballroom was still. Rebecca sobbed into her trembling hands, mascara streaking her face. Fernando's lips moved soundlessly, his eyes wide, pale with dawning horror. Guests whispered, shifting in their seats, but no one dared break the silence Travis had carved with his words. And then I felt it, a pull inside me, the quiet, insistent voice that had been buried for years. It rose through the humiliation, through the sting of wine on my skin and the burn of Rebecca's slap. I stepped forward. May I? My voice was calm, steady, though my hands shook faintly as I gestured toward the microphone. Travis looked at me, his jaw still tight with anger, but his eyes softened. He stepped aside without hesitation. The crowd parted as I walked, my heels clicking against the marble in a rhythm that echoed louder than the orchestra had played all night. I reached the microphone, feeling 300 pairs of eyes lock onto me. For a moment, I simply stood there, letting the silence stretch. My heart thudded in my chest. Then I drew in a breath. Good evening, I began, my voice firm, carrying to every corner of the grand room. I suppose introductions are in order. My name is Celeste Harrington, and yes, I am the CEO of Caden Marketing. Gasps rippled through the crowd again, though softer this time. Now, the recognition carried weight. Now, no one doubted. I let the words hang in the air, then continued. 3 years ago, I married Fernando Matthews because I believed in love. I believed I had found a partner who would support me, who would stand by me, who would protect me when life became difficult. Fernando flinched. But tonight, I said, my voice trembling only for a second before hardening, when I was humiliated by someone I tried for years to love as a sister, when I was slapped, doused in wine, and degraded in front of you all, my husband chose not to protect me. He chose to defend my attacker. Gasps again, sharp and indignant. Guests turned toward Fernando, their eyes narrowing, whispers surging through the room. Rebecca's sobs grew louder. I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean... I cut her off, my tone slicing clean through her wails. Stop. This isn't about who I am in business. This isn't about money or power. It's about respect. And respect is something every person deserves, no matter what name is printed on their business card or how much they have in their bank account. I turned, locking eyes with Fernando. His face was crumpled, stricken, his hand half raised as if reaching for me. You didn't need to know I was a CEO to stand by me. You didn't need to know I was powerful to treat me with dignity. But when it mattered most, you chose cruelty. You chose to humiliate me. He staggered a step closer, his voice a strangled whisper. Celeste, please, I didn't know. I thought... You thought what? I snapped, the microphone catching the sharpness in my voice. That I didn't matter? That your sister's dress was worth more than your wife's dignity? That protecting her pride was more important than protecting my humanity? He opened his mouth again, but no sound came. The silence around us was suffocating. Rebecca's sobs grew frantic. I never meant to hurt you. I was just upset. It was my wedding day. I turned to her, my eyes cold. Rebecca, The greatest mistake you made tonight wasn't slapping me. It wasn't even pouring wine down my dress. Your greatest mistake was showing everyone exactly who you are, and now the world sees it too." Her knees buckled, and she crumpled against Fernando's side. He caught her weakly, but his own body sagged, crushed under the weight of truth. I faced the crowd again, my voice growing steadier, stronger. "For years, I've been told to make myself smaller, to dim my light, to be grateful for love that required me to hide who I was. I listened, I believed. I diminished myself for the sake of peace, but no more." The guests sat in silence, their faces a sea of awe, sympathy, and shame. I looked at Fernando one last time. His eyes glistened, desperate. "Would it have mattered?" I asked softly, though my voice carried. "If you had known who I was, would you have loved me more? Or would you have simply found new ways to make me feel small?" His lips trembled. His silence was the answer. The microphone crackled as I released it, the stand reverberating with the finality of my words. And in that moment, I knew the woman who had entered this ballroom quietly, invisibly, was gone. I was no longer invisible. I was Celeste Harrington, and I would never diminish myself again. For a moment after my words, the ballroom was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the chandeliers. 300 people sat frozen, holding their breath, their eyes darting between me, Rebecca, and Fernando, as though afraid to miss a single flicker of expression. Then, as if the silence itself had bowed in surrender, I stepped back from the microphone. My shoulders were straight, my chin lifted, the wine-soaked fabric clinging to me like battle scars I no longer cared to hide. I turned to leave. "Celeste, wait!" Fernando's voice cracked through the stillness, ragged with desperation. He stumbled forward, his hand outstretched. His face was pale, stricken, as if he had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. "Please, don't do this. Don't walk away. I love you. I made a mistake. One moment of poor judgment. Don't throw away our marriage over this." I stopped, turning back slowly. The room leaned in, hanging on every syllable. "This wasn't one moment," I said quietly, though my voice carried like a blade slicing through velvet. "This was 3 years of you choosing everyone else's feelings over mine. 3 years of me making myself small so you could feel big. 3 years of silence I thought was love, when it was really erasure." His mouth opened, closed, desperate words caught in his throat. "Celeste, please, I'll do better. I'll protect you, I swear. Don't leave me." Rebecca clung to him, her eyes swollen, her makeup ruined, her sobs turning hysterical. "Don't let her go. Travis, please, say something. Do something." But Travis only stood there, his expression carved in stone. His gaze was fixed on his bride, a storm of disappointment and disbelief swirling in his dark eyes. "Rebecca," he said softly, but the softness was colder than any shout. "Tonight you showed me exactly who you are." Rebecca's sobs broke into wails. "No, you can't mean that. You love me." The guests whispered furiously. Some shook their heads, disgust etched across their faces. Others looked at me with awe, admiration, even respect that cut through the tension like light through a storm. An elderly woman near the front rose to her feet. "My dear," she said gently, her voice quivering, "that was the most gracious strength I've ever witnessed. Your parents must be proud." Her words cracked something inside me, not with pain, but with a release I hadn't realized I needed. I managed a small nod. "Thank you." A young man lifted his phone toward me, his voice tentative. "Miss Harrington, would you give a statement?" I met his eyes steadily. "Not tonight. This is still a family matter." He lowered the phone, nodding with unexpected respect. Around me, people shifted aside, making space. The crowd parted as though I were a queen leaving her court. Some dipped their heads, others murmured soft encouragements as I walked through the aisle of eyes and silence. Behind me, chaos erupted. Rebecca screamed Travis's name, clutching at him with clawed fingers. "You can't leave me. Not tonight. Not our wedding night." He pulled her hands from his jacket, his voice low but cutting. "I can't change who you are, Rebecca. And tonight, you showed me everything." Fernando stumbled forward again, his voice raw. "Celeste, please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can—" I stopped at the ballroom doors, turning one last time. His eyes found mine, wild and broken. "Fernando," I said softly, though each word carried like thunder, "you loved the version of me that made you feel important. But you never loved me. Because if you had, you would have been proud of both women, the one who made you breakfast every morning and the one who built Caden Marketing." The silence that followed was absolute. I turned, pushed open the heavy doors, and stepped into the cool night air. The music had stopped, but the faint echo of Rebecca's sobs and Fernando's desperate pleas followed me out, fading with every step I took. The valet was already waiting, holding the door of my car open. Not the modest Honda Fernando believed I drove, but the sleek black Tesla I kept at my downtown office. As I slid into the driver's seat, the air around me shifted. The weight of years, the silence, the compromises, the humiliation, lifted piece by piece until only clarity remained. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The morning light poured into my penthouse apartment through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the city in gold. From here, high above the streets, the world looked calm, orderly, untouched by the chaos of last night. But my phone told a different story. 67 missed calls, over 200 unread texts, notifications stacked so quickly my screen froze. The story had already spread. Billionaire CEO slapped at wedding. Family betrayal unfolds before 300 guests. The night Celeste Harrington stopped hiding. Clips were already circulating. The slap, the whine, Travis's thunderous speech, my own words at the microphone. Strangers online dissected every second, debating whether I had planned it all, whether Rebecca's marriage could survive, whether Fernando had destroyed his life with a single choice. But I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about the silence. For 3 years I had lived in silence, swallowing insults, hiding my success, pretending to be small for love, and now, in less than an hour, that silence had been shattered. My phone buzzed again, a message from Travis. Celeste, I wanted you to know. Rebecca and I talked all night. For the first time, really talked. She's beginning to understand what she did. I think there's hope for us, but what matters more is this. Watching you stand up for yourself last night was one of the most inspiring things I've ever seen. Thank you for showing me what strength looks like. Our partnership will move forward as planned. I smiled faintly, relief blooming in my chest. At least business would remain intact. Travis had earned my respect years ago, and now he had cemented it. But Rebecca, that was another story. I rose, patted across the polished wood floors, and poured myself coffee. The steam curled upward, soft and fragrant. For the first time in years, I drank it in peace. No hurried sips between errands for Fernando's family, no interruptions from Rebecca's shrill demands. By mid-morning, my lawyer called. His voice was brisk, professional. Celeste, if you're ready, we can begin divorce proceedings immediately. Yes, I said simply. It's time. There was no hesitation in my voice, no trace of the fear that had once held me captive. At 10 o'clock sharp, I was back in my downtown office, my true home, the place where I had never needed to hide. My staff greeted me with wide eyes and quiet reverence. They had seen the videos. They knew. In the conference room, I reviewed the final details of the Thompson partnership. Contracts, figures, marketing rollouts. Work was steady, grounding, familiar. The empire I had built was unshaken. Then came the knock at my office door. Ma'am, my assistant said hesitantly, peeking inside. There's a man here asking to see you. He says he's your husband, Fernando Matthews. I looked up slowly from the documents in front of me. The words on the page blurred, replaced by the image of his face in the ballroom. Pale, desperate, humiliated. Tell him, I said evenly, that Celeste Harrington doesn't have a husband. If he wants to see me, he can make an appointment through the proper channels. My assistant nodded, eyes wide, and disappeared. Through the glass walls of my office, I saw him standing in the lobby, disheveled, shoulders slumped, arguing with security. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a man watching his world crumble. And perhaps he was. Because for the first time, he was forced to live within his own means. The house, the vacations, the comfortable life, all of it had been mine. And now it was slipping from his grasp. Rebecca's life, too, was unraveling. The tabloids were merciless. Bride from hell. The slap that cost $200 million. Her followers turned on her. Sponsors withdrew, and her brand began to collapse. Travis hadn't left her. Not yet, but their marriage was born under a cloud of shame that would take years to clear, if it ever did. I stood at my window, gazing out at the city below, my reflection faint in the glass. For the first time in years, I saw myself clearly. Not the invisible wife, not the clumsy sister-in-law. Me, Celeste Harrington. And I was free. 7 months later, the divorce was final. Fernando kept the house. I let him. It was the least valuable thing I'd ever given away. Everything else reverted to me. The accounts, the investments, the quiet empire that had always been mine alone. He tried in the beginning. Endless phone calls, flowers delivered daily, late-night messages dripping with regret. Please, Celeste, give me another chance. I'll change. I'll be better. But regret doesn't rebuild what was never truly there. Love cannot be born from pity. The last time I saw him, he looked hollowed out, a man who finally understood the difference between loving someone and loving the idea of them. His final words to me were whispered, almost inaudible. I didn't know how much you carried. And I thought that was the problem. You never cared to ask. Rebecca and Travis's marriage survived, though barely. They went to counseling. Their faces occasionally splashed across gossip columns. Power couple works to heal after scandal. The truth was less glamorous. Travis loved her, but he never forgot what he saw that night. For Rebecca, every step forward came with the shadow of her own actions trailing behind her. Did I pity her? Sometimes. Because what she lost that night wasn't just dignity or followers or reputation. She lost the illusion that cruelty could ever be hidden under charm. She had to face herself, and that, I knew, was the harshest punishment of all. As for me, I never remarried. Not because I didn't believe in love, but because I had learned the most important lesson of my life. I would never again make myself smaller to be loved. I traveled. I built my company into something even more formidable, expanding into industries I'd once only dreamed of. I stood on stages across the world, speaking not just about business, but about resilience, about dignity, about never dimming yourself for someone else's comfort. People often asked if I regretted hiding my identity for so long, if I regretted living two lives. My answer was always the same. No, because it taught me what real love is. Real love doesn't require you to shrink. Real love doesn't silence your voice or diminish your worth. Real love celebrates you, every part of you. Anything less isn't love at all. At night, I would stand by the vast windows of my penthouse, the city lights flickering below like a galaxy spread across the earth. I'd hold a glass of wine, white, never red, and remember that night at Grandview Manor. The chandeliers, the gasps, the slap, the wine soaking into my dress. The microphone cold in my hands as I finally spoke the truth I had swallowed for years. And I would smile, because that was the night I stopped hiding. The night I walked out of silence and into myself. The night I realized that the most powerful revenge isn't cruelty. It's dignity. It's refusing to let anyone ever again make you small.